Welcome to Sadler Sessions, brought to us by the Whirlpool. Matt Hill is our special guest on this episode. We chat about calling the Melbourne Cup, calling the Great Mare Winks, getting into AFL football, calling the Olympic Games, the fact he almost lost his life in his first Olympic Games, and how that spurred him on into potentially calling more Olympics like in Brisbane in 2032 with Gout hopefully being there. Enjoy, Matt Hill. Matt Hill, thanks for joining us on Sadler Sessions in a time where you've got the Spring Carnival right now and coming off the Tokyo Championships and also footy finals. We've had a busy year. Appreciate you squeezing us in today.
No, it's an absolute pleasure, Ed, and this is the neatest podcast studio I've ever been in, so I'm happy to sit here for half an hour with you. Great to chat. It's been a busy time, but as you mentioned, the Spring Carnival, it's the best time of year, isn't it? The weather's getting better. People are coming to the races. People are interested in the races. And it all culminates with that fabulous week at Flemington. But Caulfield Cup week's always a great week to start because we get into the real serious stuff with the guineas, etc. And I always loved the Caulfield Cup. I reckon there's no other race during the year that's referenced more. When a horse wins a race, they'll say that could win a Caulfield Cup, that horse. And I think at times, I think the Melbourne Racing Club have been a little bit... they probably want to knock their own race and say that we don't want to be second fiddle to the Melbourne Cup, but I disagree with that. I think the Caulfield Cup's always had that unique standing as a 2,400-metre handicap. Yes, there are horses that run good races in it, and it can be a guide to the Melbourne Cup, but individually in its own right, it's a fabulous race. Obviously, the Cox Plate this time around is a little bit more special because it's the last running under its current configuration at the Valley, which is exciting and sad at the same time. And then Cup Week, which is the greatest carnival in the world. And then, of course, it extends for another 3 or 4 weeks after that. So it's a great thing to be involved with in a small way.
When you're a young boy growing up at Altona Meadows, did you think that this is what you'd be doing when you're in your late 30s, now early 40s?
Well, I would have hoped to have been doing it. But for me, it was a dream. For me, I was just a dreamer from Altona Meadows, a boy from a, single mother family, single parent family who loved racing and would sit and watch the races during the Spring Carnival, absolutely spellbound by the whole thing. The colour, the sound, the horses, the whole thing was just, I was obsessed with it. So I had a bit of a one-track mind, if you pardon the pun. I was always wanting to be involved. But I think if you said to me when I was 18 that I'd call the Warrigal Dogs on Melbourne Cup Day, I would have easily accepted it as well. I just wanted to do it. And, yeah, it's remarkable to think this is my 9th Melbourne Cup this year. Let me tell you, it goes fast. My first one feels like yesterday. And, Greg called 36 of them. I can imagine how fast that must have gone for him as well. I know your granddad called many, Frank O'Brien and Joe Brown, Bill Collins, Bert Bryant, Brian Martin, Dan Malecki, all of the great callers before me. I'm sure it felt pretty fast for them too.
Do you feel like you're the custodian of the Melbourne Cup broadcast, given all the history that's come before you with all those people that you mentioned?
Yeah, you do. You feel like that you've got to keep the standard, absolutely. And this year is actually quite a special one because it's the 100th year that the Melbourne Cup is being broadcast. So a little history lesson. In 1925, a man by the name of Bill Priestley called the first ever Melbourne Cup as far as being broadcast on radio. But technology back then obviously wasn't very sophisticated, so there's no recording of it. There was probably radio signal, but no recording devices by all reports. So there's no actual call that we can listen to. I believe the first one we've got is of 1930, which was on the ABC, and a caller by the name of Jim Carroll. 100 years of the race being broadcast. And you've got to remember too, we sit on the line at Flemington. It's still one of the trickiest angles in world racing. We complain about that on a weekly basis. And unless they jilt the grandstand 180 degrees, it's not going to improve. But some of the callers back in the 50s and 60s called the races from the Pioneer Hotel, which is directly across from the 1,600-metre mark at Flemington.
Basically at Footscray Park, essentially.
Pretty much in Footscray Park, opposite the winning line, about 3 kilometres away, because the officialdom deemed that radio stations were taking the crowd away. And when you look at the pictures from the 50s and 60s, 130,000 at the races every Saturday. So all of the commercial radio stations, including a voice that the older generation would remember, Eric Welsh, would call from a balcony at about the 1,500 metre mark, looking basically behind the horses, behind the grandstand. And the only caller allowed was the ABC caller, who was the course broadcaster at the same time, a man by the name of Jim Carroll. And that was how it went. So there's a fair bit of history when it comes to the 100 years of broadcasting the Cup. You go back to 1983 when Kiwi won the Cup. I think there was about 9 different callers between all the different Channel 10s and radio stations and on-course callers, etc. And now there's one. So it's had an interesting evolution.
Do you feel the pressure because it is just you calling the Cup?
You feel pressure anyway, but I think the thing about the Melbourne Cup, I liken it always to a footballer on grand final day where they've had a week to think about it, and they run onto the field, and as soon as the bounce goes up and they get a touch of the ball, they're back to their natural habitat, I suppose. They're back to doing what they're used to doing. So for me, it's very nerve-wracking in the lead up to it, probably the hour beforehand. So we've got 6 races before it. So the 6 races are a good little warm-up, actually. You get your eye in, get the rhythm going, and you don't think too much about the Cup when we're going through those. But then the hour leading up, obviously, you've got the music beforehand, and the chairman of the VRC holds the Cup aloft and things, and that can get you a bit wound up. And I try and block all of that out if I can. But that little part of it is, I guess it's natural. You have to feel nervous to be wound up about it. But as soon as the gates open and you call a horse's name and you see a few horses in order, then you feel back to doing what you were doing an hour ago when you were calling the mare's race that no one can remember.
Let's go back to the beginning of the journey then. So when did it go from being that dream to a potential reality that you could be a professional, not just race caller, but sports broadcaster?
Well, I think in my schooling, I was just determined to do it. So even when I was in my year 11, year 12 years, I was going to the races and practicing on weekends and calling a few barrier trials and greyhound meetings. My first ever meeting, I was 17, a full meeting, was in a place called Poon Kerry, which is a dusty little town just up higher than Mildura, just over the border. And the year before, apparently, they didn't have a race caller, but the publican had offered his services in Poon Kerry and said, how hard can it be? I'll call the races, And it was difficult, and he slaughtered the first, to which he was booed off the platform, apparently, and then race caller karaoke ensued, which means that anyone who wanted to have a crack could have had a crack, and the whole thing was just diabolical. So they tried to find a caller and put the call out for any young people that were calling, and via radio station Sport 927, I got the call up, and it was great fun. I travelled all the way up, did that. So I was on my way, and from that point on, I can't remember a time. I remember going for a scholarship at a radio station in Melbourne and didn't get it. And I probably spent a good 2 or 3 months there, just basically an unemployed 18-year-old, didn't know really what I was doing with myself, and picked up a few dog trials and harness trials. But I was just determined to do it. And if there was any other job going for working behind a bar or something, I didn't want to do it. I just wanted to call things. And I ended up getting a scholarship with Sky Channel, which meant I was well and truly on my way, and moved to Sydney, was there for 16 years. And that was a great time because I was in the door. Any person that wants to be a broadcaster, it's no good sitting around wanting to be one. You have to be in the door. I remember famously my idol and predecessor, Greg Miles, was the paper boy or the mail boy at the ABC. And he figured, well, it's better to be in the door than out of it. And, of course, he got the call up as a 21-year-old to call his first Melbourne Cup when Joe Brown retired. So that would be my greatest bit of advice for anyone wanting to do it, is just get in the door. Doesn't matter what you're doing, just get in, because they'll always employ within instead of without.
What was that grounding like for you at Sky in those days?
Well, I learned everything from, even I had a day on my roster to learn how to tie a tie, and do your makeup and things like that for television. So, which was really, really intriguing for someone who hadn't been around TV. And then I learned how to produce stories and write stories. And I suppose it's changed nowadays. You used to have to go out and then come home and time code each story, which meant you had to look at every little bit of vision and write it down. I suppose that's all done via computers nowadays, but learned it from the very top, as far as doing stories, hosting, and it was great. It was great grounding on Sky Racing because you'd have to talk. There was no auto cue. In fact, throughout my career, I reckon I've done 2 programs that's had auto cue. The rest of it's just been talking straight out. So it's great grounding, just having to go, okay, you've got 5 minutes to the next dog race at Warrnambool and you've got to fill, you've got to talk about it. So that was great grounding. You can't beat time at the crease, time at the microphone, learning how to be on air and getting through it. And I guess what's changed nowadays is there's so much racing that there's probably 30 seconds between each race on Sky Channel now. Back in the day, we had 9-minute gaps, which you'd have to, think of something to say for a CO pace at Bathurst and make it sound interesting, So they were great days. And obviously at the same time calling the greyhounds and the harness and the thoroughbreds and learning the hard way, going to places like Muswellbrook, which was one of the hardest tracks to call at. You'd throw your bag in at the end of the day thinking, geez, I've done a day's work today and I called really badly. But it was just a hard place to work at. They'd come at you head on. You'd never see the horses in the mounting yard beforehand. You talked about the Melbourne Cup and the, how you feel before it. When they're at the start in the Melbourne Cup, I think to myself, I've done the grounding, I've done all the hard yards, so this should be easy, and you've just got to back yourself in. It's like a batsman about to face Curtly Ambrose. You just say, come on, bring it on, bring it on.
You can't block, though, at a Melbourne Cup. You've got to play a shot.
You've got to play your shots, but that's very true. You can't just leave it to go through to the wicketkeeper, but you do have to have that form of self-belief, otherwise you couldn't do it. And they always want to tell me the day before on radio interviews how many people are listening, and the number gets bigger every year. I don't know. Sometimes some of the figures are bigger than actually the people that exist in the world. But I think its global reach is very big. And if I was to think that as the horses were going in, I wouldn't be able to do it. So I just imagine I'm calling to one person. I imagine my mum that I'm calling to, and I'm just describing to her what's going on. I'm in a quiet broadcast box. There isn't 100,000 people there. I'm just in a cocoon, and I've got to give it 3.5 minutes concentration. And what race calling is a concentration game. So you can't physically, I don't think anyway, call every race perfectly, because I would call probably 1,300 races a year. And to think that I would concentrate 120% fully on that task every single race, you'd be kidding yourself. But the Melbourne Cup, for 3 minutes, you probably put 200% concentration in. You have a good night's sleep that night, I can tell you.
So for a cup, or for that matter, the Cox Plate, the Caulfield Cup, with that level of concentration, do you hear things like the roar of the crowd or that sort of stuff, or do you almost block everything out?
You hear it, you do, but you kind of ignore it. You know it's there. It's almost white noise in a way. You do hear the crowd on Cox Plate Day particularly at about the 600. You know they're there. But you don't have time to even enjoy it or take it in. You know the crowd's going to be there on Melbourne Cup Day. So you do take it in some respects. I reckon there was a couple of years ago, someone started a chant with about one horse to go in. I reckon there was a group of about 20 yahoos that weren't too far away from the broadcast box, and I sort of did take notice of that, thinking that something was wrong. But you can actually get a bit when the clerks of the course horses run down the straight. When the Melbourne Cup is being run, the cup gets to about the 1,500, and these clerks of the course horses come down the straight, and the crowd give them like a Bronx cheer. And so all of a sudden there's this massive roar for really no reason. And as you're calling, you think, what have I missed? What have I missed? So little things like that, you do have to sort of concentrate through. But to be honest, look, it's not the easiest of gigs, but it's still an absolute privilege to do it, to be the one race caller. There's a lot of race callers in Australia, and to be the guy that does it, it's only can be described as a privilege. And you'd like to be the Wimbledon ball boy. You'd like to be the guy that leaves Flemington on the track that day and no one's noticed that you've made a blue, or just want to get it done, get it 100% satisfied for yourself, and leave unscathed. That's what you try and do.
You've taken over from two icons in two different cities as the number one caller. First of all, in Sydney after getting the John Tapp Scholarship at Sky, taking over from Ian Craig. Tell us about that experience, Matt.
Yeah, well, Ian was such an icon, and still is. You listen to those race calls from Sydney and it's just that's what Randwick and Rosehill were to me, listening to guys like John Tapp and Ian Craig, So Ian set such a high standard, and I reckon the two most nervous meetings I've ever done were the meetings after Ian Craig retired and after Greg Miles retired, because you knew straight away that people would make a comparison, and that's only natural, But I think the first one I did with Ian was a Wednesday at Canterbury, and I was really nervous that day, knowing they'll be judging straight away. And I think I did a Monday, it was Easter Monday at Sandown, was the day I took over from Greg. And I was pretty nervous that day. But Ian was fantastic. And the thing about Ian Craig was I still can't remember him making a mistake. I listened to him for years, and even living in Sydney listening to Ian, I can't recall him ever making a blue, which is phenomenal. And I don't think Ian was a punter. He wasn't really a punter's caller. Whereas a guy like Bill Collins famously was a big, big, big punter. And there's no right and wrong reasons for that. But Ian had the most magnificent voice. He was the envy of a lot of callers, had this extraordinarily deep voice from not a big guy, and such a charming man, such a lovely man to be around, and he was so encouraging of the younger callers. So it was a real honour to take that spot at Sky Channel for 5.5 years. And the one race that I did adore and still do is the Golden Slipper. For me, that was the Sydney race. Growing up watching the Golden Slipper, it was a very Sydney race. 16 runners, all about money, fast, furious. Loved it. Loved calling the Golden Slipper because you just didn't have any chance to get into your rhythm at all. It was just they're off and you've got a minute 10 to describe what was going on. And the first one I did was Manic because Crystal Lily won it, Brett Preble. And it ran off the track with about 100 to go. They were right across the course. So I had an interesting one to start with. And, of course, calling at places like Randwick, like what a place to work at, one of the best tracks to call at, Royal Randwick. And I actually had the pleasure of calling from the old boxes that Ken Howard used to call out of. And Ken Howard, and you think about some of the older
Des Hoisted.
Well, Des Hoisted absolutely would have been next to him. You think of even David Morrow at the ABC. Those guys, they're the best designed broadcast boxes hanging off the roof, and then the roof had to come off, and then eventually the grandstand had to go. So we ended up in new boxes, which were just as good, and have a great view of this magnificent racecourse. So Randwick was always a beauty, but Rosehill was always my favourite. I loved the Golden Slipper. I loved Rosehill. And still miss it a little bit. I watch a race from Rosehill and really enjoyed those days calling in Sydney. But I was there for 16 years and a Melbourne boy, family in Melbourne. They don't really get the rules of AFL up there, do they?
They've got a good team, the Swans.
They've got a very good team, but they're a rugby league town, and it was time to come home.
So when you did make the decision to come home, that was for a sports commentary role with the ABC. Did you think that was it for race calling at that point in time?
Yeah, I thought I'd resign to the fact that if that was going to be it, that was going to be it, because I always wanted to call the footy, very passionate about calling the footy. And I started doing that, plus reading some sport on news radio, and really, really enjoyed that. It was a completely different role, but I did enjoy that sort of routine life of 9 to 5, reading the sport and and also being a part of a team that was covering world news. It was good for the mind. But then no one would have even expected, and a lot of us are pretty close to Greg, but when he finished in 2016, that he was going to finish. And I could have kept doing what I was doing. I would have been eventually working myself up the pole in football at some point steadily. But Greg retired, and of course the one dream that I had was to call the Melbourne Cup, and I think that's the big carrot with the calling job in Melbourne is the Melbourne Cup and the Cox Plate, obviously. So had to jump at that, and I think a few people thought that I'd sort of walked away from race calling. I think I was 33-1 on a novelty market to get the gig.
Did you have a little something on that?
No, God, no. I don't mind a putt, but I'd never bet on something like that. But I think a few people did, and I got slammed in. I think one of the wagering providers had to close the book pretty quickly because they knew what was going on. But look, it's been a lot of fun, and to be honest, I look back now and think, gee, I've done extraordinarily well considering I was just the boy from Altona Meadows that would go off to the races and practice and into a tape recorder. But I was just so focused on it. I'm a bit of a competitive bugger too. It was just, I literally had a one-track mind. I was that focused. And to be honest, I'm more focused now than I ever have. You mentioned things like the athletics and the football. It's my life. I just love getting up and going and calling stuff. And that'll never change. I'm as keen at 44 as I was when I was 14.
And when you say you're competitive, are you comparing yourself to other callers, or are you competitive to get the best out of yourself and better yourself?
Competitive with myself. Yeah, competitive with myself. I actually really enjoy other callers. I had a lifetime listening to Bruce McAvaney call sport and Greg Miles call the races, and I love Jim McGrath in England. I loved it. In fact, I used to say to my friends, I used to get depressed and say, can't I have a voice like Jim McGrath? It's the greatest voice I've ever heard. And I still love listening back to the old tapes of, Brian Martin calling Cox Plates and Bill Collins, calling Cup Carnivals. I actually enjoy other callers, and which is, I think, a nice thing. And have some great people that are my age now that are calling sport too, that are fantastic to listen to. So, very much competitive against myself, live in my own little world a lot of the time. But look, it's just too much fun, isn't it? I got the greatest job in the world in. Get to go to Flemington on a Saturday and the MCG on a Sunday and get paid for it. I mean, you couldn't possibly complain, could you?
No, it's a terrific job to have, Matty, but you deserve it and have done so well at it. When you took over from Greg, I know the dreams to call the Melbourne Cup, but the timing of it meant that you were calling a horse called Winx, who was about to go for her third Cox Plate, and it was well known, essentially, when you took the job, that that's something you were going to be doing. What was that build-up like, and then what was it like to deliver the call?
Well, I found it quite tough because everyone expects you to come up with something, and in a way you have to, because you've got to do a champion justice. But that's not kind of the race call that I like. I enjoy the off-the-cuff call that's not rehearsed or not thought about beforehand. So the way I tried to approach it, because I never really had to experience it before, was just think of a couple of words that would sum her up and then go for it. And then just see if it could come out organically. So again, I was like 0.002% part of that ride that they all had with Winx, and every time there'd be a build up to the Cox Plate, there'd be a launch, and Debbie Kafidis and the tyres would be there, and Chris Waller and Hugh Bowman. It felt like the juggernaut just got bigger and bigger and bigger as the years went on, and it was fantastic. But I think even Darren Flindell would admit he called more of Winx than I did. And when Winx would win and come to Melbourne, he'd literally send me a text or ring me and say, well, she's your problem now, because you genuinely felt like you had to do her justice all the time. But my favourite call was the one where we didn't have time to wax lyrical about her, was when she was in trouble in the Turnbull Stakes, the second Turnbull. And on the line, just out of pure thought, I've just come out with, well, they just can't beat her, And I'm sure that's probably what 99% of the people watching were thinking, you know. So I was quite proud of that call because it was completely off the cuff. And I've always thought when Mike Williamson was going to the football the day of the famous Jezelenko mark, I'm pretty sure he wasn't driving his car saying to his wife or saying to someone, you know what I'm going to say today, Jezelenko, you beauty. And I'm sure when Stephen Quartermain drove to the MCG that day, he wasn't expecting to say, Leo Barry, you star. I think most broadcasters would love to be defined by a call that was just off the cuff, not one that was rehearsed. So to go back to the Winks stuff, yes, I did have to come out with things that were well thought about beforehand. But would I say that I'm as proud as, say, the Vow and Declare Melbourne Cup or even the Knight's Choice Melbourne Cup? I'd say no. I'd say the ones that are off the cuff are the calls that I prefer.
She the best you've called, Winks?
Yeah, but Winks and Black Caviar, obviously. But you have horses that come along for a year that you absolutely adore. I mean, we've had a lot of fun with, say, Mr. Brightside, you know, and you have different types of horses. You know, you have horses that are in our life for 6 months. You have horses that are around for 4 or 5 years that won't be called the greatest ever, but are there, you know, and you have different levels of fun with all of them. Jockeys as well, you know. J-Mac has given us a lot to talk about over the last few Melbourne Cup carnivals, and that's what makes them memorable. But, yeah, I think Winks was definitely – she was just bulletproof, wasn't she? They couldn't beat her. No. As I said, they couldn't beat her.
Perfectly summed up. From a football point of view then, so you mentioned before you came back to Melbourne to call the football. What was it like though, and what has it been like for you stepping from one arena, the racing arena, into the football arena and having to prove yourself in a game Melbournians particularly are so passionate about?
Well, I mean, the hardest part about it is that everyone's got an opinion. So what I find is with say, horse race broadcasting is you can either do it or you can't, whereas with AFL commentary, a lot of it is about style. You know, I mean, for instance, the last grand final, there were 10 different broadcasts of that grand final, 8 on radio and 2 television calls. So you've fundamentally got 20 commentators doing the same thing, and they're calling the same players, but their style's different, you know. And so that doesn't necessarily mean someone can't call the game. It just means that someone doesn't like your style. And I think, yeah, jumping into that realm of opinion has been hard, but I've chosen just to ignore all of it, regardless if it's good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not on social media, never have been. And I'm sort of very lucky in that I can close myself off that. I can wake up in the morning and not really know what's being said, good, bad, or indifferent. I think what's interesting about the two disciplines is they are two separate disciplines, but they're also different bubbles. So I can go to the football on a Thursday night and the people I'm working with, for maybe David King and Jack Rewald, who like the races, don't really care what's going to happen on the Saturday at Flemington, whereas I rock up to Flemington on Saturday and there's people who don't care what happened the Thursday night before at the footy. So I'm jumping from one bubble to another, and for me that's quite healthy. And I think if through the winter, if I was just concentrating on one thing, that would mow me down a little bit. And yeah, I mean, the AFL, it's a great buzz. If you get to call a close game, it's fantastic. And you work with the team. It's like a project. You walk in at 5 o'clock, you have your meeting, discuss what we're doing, and then you're away at 7 o'clock, and you work as a group, you know, and it's so much fun in that respect. Whereas racing, I'm in a box for 8 hours a day on a Saturday on my own, in my own head, you know, so it is good to mix it up.
The other thing I wanted to talk to you about with the football, your profile has grown significantly from the outside looking in, particularly with the Thursday nights and with Fox Footy. What's that like for you, Matt, that increased presence and fame, for want of a better term?
Well, I think if you go the right way about it, I mean, I never did the job for fame. It was never something I even thought about. It was just it's a byproduct. Fame's not the right word anyway, but profile maybe. I just genuinely love putting words to what's happening. You know, that's what I love doing, and I still have a great ambition to rock up to a sporting event and call it. I've got this great love of it. And if people know who I am for it or what, that's fine. But yeah, look, people are very nice. If people come up to you at the football or the races, people are very, very nice. And as I say, I'm not on social media. I don't quite understand the nastiness on social media. I don't quite get it, how, people that have no name, they're anonymous, can just say the most horrific things it might be about a race call or their thoughts. I just don't get it. I think all social media really has done is brought out the narcissism and the negativity in people, really. And but look, the other side of it, is that we are doing what we're doing. We're talking into a microphone. We've got cameras, so people are watching. So that's going to bring about criticism. So how do you deal with it? You ignore it. You ignore it. I find that I've got good mentors, good people. If I really need to discuss something, I will with them, and I do. A couple of retired race callers I speak to, couple of older football commentators I would talk to trust about things, and your colleagues, they're the ones that are doing it with you. They're the ones that are in the trenches with you, so to speak. So, I find that you've got to be very careful which opinions you take to heart. But as I mentioned before, I'm a bit of a competitive bugger, but I'm also a bit of a sensitive person, very sensitive. And the problem is with, say, race calling, is it's like anything that the level that you're working at is so high that one little bit of negativity in your brain can bring you down. It's like what Stephen Fry once said about a beautiful swimming pool. You could have a beautiful, glistening Olympic swimming pool with a turd in one corner and you're jumping in the other corner. You're still not going to jump in the pool, are you? And it's so true. The last thing I want in my head as they're going into the stalls in the Melbourne Cup is, that Matt Hill can't call a photo finish right, or that Matt Hill can't call a race or whatever. Because it's human nature, Ed. If there's 100 people giving an opinion, 99 say you're fantastic, 1% say that you're a shithead, you're going to take notice of the one, aren't you? It's just human nature. So, I try to ignore it as much as I can. But I'm aware that AFL is what it is. I mean, my profile's nothing compared to what footballers are. I don't know how footballers do it, to be honest. They can't go anywhere without someone knowing who they are. So it's just the nature of the beast in Melbourne, and you just have to be aware of it.
How do you manage your time through a week? Because, say, during the football season, where Wednesday you've got midweek races, Thursday night footy, Friday night footy, Saturday races, Sunday footy, there's not just those games and those race meetings you have to go to. There's the preparation for them too.
Yeah. So the thing about what I do, which becomes quite tiring, is my mind is on a lot. I'm thinking a lot. But what I try and do is just compartmentalise the sport. So a Wednesday race day, call the races, but I'll probably do a lot of my Saturday prep for the races that day, maybe that day or night. And then I go into football mode after that. The Thursday night and Friday night footy, and then back to the races Saturday, and then Sunday can be a little bit of a last-minute scramble, and then Monday, Tuesdays are like the weekend. But during footy season, I'm pretty much working every day, which is probably not very well balanced, but I get a kick out of it. I really enjoy it, and look, you get tired and all that sort of stuff, but geez, I tell you what, I'd prefer to be tired walking into the MCG than not. You know what I mean? I think it is what it is. We're calling a game of football. We're not solving problems of the world. It's just a game of football, and it's just too much fun not to do it. So I think you've got to keep a pretty balanced mind on the whole thing.
If we went through every sport you'd called, we'd be here for quite some time. But the Olympic Games is a big part of your story too. The first Games, Beijing.
Yes.
Tell us about what happened to you there, mate.
Well, I was calling predominantly rowing for 2GB with Ray Hadley and his team in 2008. And we'd been there for a week. I'd been a part of the opening ceremony, and we'd as a team, broadcast the Australian soccer team game the night before the opening ceremony. And I was calling a couple of days of rowing, and got very ill. so much so that I collapsed and was taken to a Beijing hospital, thinking that it was probably heat stroke or something like that. And as time went on, it just got worse, worse. And one of the nurses, and I still can't remember the time frame myself now, but told me that I had pneumonia. So I'm thinking, okay, it's still called with pneumonia. It's not the worst thing in the world, but it was getting worse, to the extent where the Australian team doctors were called and came to visit me and said, listen, and as I say, this went over a night or two. I can't remember the time frame because I was pretty heavily sedated in the end. Was told that I'd be in a coma, induced coma, and would wake up in Hong Kong. So I didn't realise that they'd actually told my mother, who was in Australia, that if I was to make the flight, the chartered flight, that I'd live. So I was heading down a pretty dark path, and anyway, I woke up in Hong Kong. I survived it, and it took them a long time to work out what I had, and they absolutely hit me with antibiotics. It was like 5 sets of antibiotics, and this one in particular was a newish antibiotic, but masked what I had. So they were saving my life, but they couldn't quite work out what I had. Anyway, I came good. I was in intensive care and then put into a normal ward in Hong Kong, and I was told probably a month afterwards that I had a condition called melioidosis. If you look through the symptoms of it, it's pretty similar to COVID. And it was acute melioidosis will kill you. It's a 90% death rate. So I was close. It was close. So not expecting that in my first Olympic Games, but it was certainly memorable. But again, as I said to you before, I can be a bit competitive within myself. I was just determined to do as many as possible then. So I'm up to number 8 in Milan in February, coming up with the Winter Olympics, and I hope I do 88. I just, I feel like it really did surge me on. And London Olympics I did, which was fantastic, and then Sochi Winter Olympics, Rio, Tokyo, Beijing Winter Olympics, Paris, and now Milan. So I love the Olympics. I think the sports intrigue me, the spectacle intrigues me, but also the broadcasting of them intrigues me, how big a deal it is. You walk into the International Media Centre and it's just, it blows your mind how much interest there is. And then what I'm also fascinated by is you can go to, say, the athletics, and there'll be something like 170 commentary positions, and the Australians will be up and about because we've just won the 100-metre hurdles. But then the Ethiopian commentary team are up and about because they've just won the 5,000 and we couldn't give a hang about the 5,000. It's such a global thing that we all care about different things, and it's a fabulous event. And it's got its issues, I mean, it's expensive. It's expensive to broadcast. It's expensive to run. So where the Olympics heads in the next, say, half a century is going to be very, very interesting. But it's still a great spectacle. And, for a broadcaster, I always wanted to do them mainly because I think it's a great test if you're doing a sport that you don't know a lot about. But also those sports like athletics at the top level, you can't beat it, and obviously, like everybody else, was spellbound in Barcelona when Bruce was calling, all the big stars in Atlanta and then Sydney. And, if you're a teenager like I was when Sydney 2000 came around, it was just inspiring to want to be a part of it. And now, for that generation, Brisbane 2032 is going to be pretty special when we've got our own home Olympics again.
Well, you'll be there, surely?
Well, I hope so. Hopefully I'm somewhere near Gout. So Gout ran at the World Athletics Championships, and on the Wednesday and Thursday nights fetched 2.2 million viewers on 9. That was on 9. And then I think it was something like 1 million viewers each night on SBS. So if he's getting 3.2 million viewers when he's running 4th in a World Championship semi-final, imagine if he's the favourite in the 200 final in Brisbane. I mean, the whole country will stop. So you'd want to be somewhere near the microphone when that's happening. Brisbane 2032, it's when you think about it, it's a fair way away, But let me tell you, it'll come quick. It'll come quick.
Yeah, that could be this generation's Cathy Freeman moment, really, couldn't it?
Could be. And I mean, the way it's looking, absolutely, the progression. But obviously there's a lot of pressure on Gout too. And what we were talking about before, what's interesting about it is what Cathy Freeman would have had to have dealt with, having the pressure of that. And now Gout, he's 17. You've got the social media world. We're in a different world. So he's got a lot to deal with. And his coach, Di Shepherd, I think is going to be the secret to him. I think she's going to be the one that'll keep him on the straight and narrow. But it's even though his results, he can run unencumbered at the moment, but he ran a bit tight in his heat in Tokyo. So pressure is a big thing, and if he's got the whole country behind him in 6 years' time, in the world we live in, it's a lot of pressure on the young man.
So you're calling Gout for the Tokyo World Athletics Championships. You've had a full footy season where you've worked every day. We're into the spring carnival now. When do you give yourself a let-up?
Holiday in December, going overseas in December. But I love this time of year. This is the best time of year, as I say. Weather's getting better. The horses are around. And, you've got to remember with horse racing, because it's every day. Like horse racing's on every day. That this is our grand final time, the next 4 weeks with Caulfield, Moonee Valley, Flemington. This is the time, that we wait for, that we build up to, and you look forward to it. The problem is you look forward to it so much and it goes that quick. It'll be Melbourne Cup Day before we know it. So I've made a pact with myself to enjoy it a bit more this year and not get so wound up in it. But how could you not? Everyone dresses up, everyone looks lovely, and the racing's fantastic. It's a great spectacle. History's being made. So, no, bring it on. I wouldn't swap it for anything else. And then we'll have a holiday after that.
The Melbourne Cups, Grand Nationals.
Well, the footy will be around quicker before you know it too. Like the footy starts in February now, so it'll be
State
around.
of origin for you.
Well, by all reports, yeah. But even just when you start talking about the pre-season games and things, we'll be back at it by February. So it comes around. It's almost a yearly thing now.
It is, particularly with the trades and everything else. What's left on the bucket list, Matt? What's left for you broadcasting-wise that you'd love to turn your attention to at some point?
Well, I love broadcasting. So that's a good question. I think with sport, any adventure would be fun. I'd tell you, there's a few other sports that I do really enjoy, like tennis and MotoGP and things. So, I'd love to be involved in that somewhere. I've done tennis, but, I'd love to go to Wimbledon and work on a Wimbledon or something like that. I'm very intrigued about, you mentioned the English racing. I love English racing and worked on Grand Nationals and things, but I'd love to call more in America. A Kentucky Derby would be good, or back in England, a Cheltenham Festival. I'm obsessed with the jumps races. I love the Cheltenham Festival. So little bucket listers like that. I had the pleasure of working at Royal Ascot, which was really whet the appetite there. That was fantastic. But you never know what's around the corner. I think broadcasting is going to change as well. There's a new generation of callers younger than me that are now calling off a monitor, and there's callers calling races from Turkey and Saudi Arabia and Morocco and Germany, and they're all based in Melbourne or based somewhere else, in England. So probably a few of these things that you'd like to do are probably more attainable now because you can do things remotely. I was trying to work out the other day, because Arc Day is such a great day. How good is Arc Day? Is it possible to get from Flemington to Longchamp and not miss them? So do the last race at Flemington and then get to Tullamarine Airport and get to Gare du Nord, get to Longchamp or Charles de Gaulle and then to Longchamp? And the answer is no. So the only way you could probably do it, if you were to broadcast both, was to do one of them off tube, which would be called the Arc from here. So those sort of opportunities might come along as time goes on, because I think that's the and look, to be honest, the World Athletics Championships, if I was to go, I wouldn't have been allowed to do them because of the horse racing commitment. So those sort of options, who knows, could do a Cheltenham Festival off monitor one day, who knows. So those sort of things will happen.
Matty, great to have a chat. Thanks so much for coming on. There's so much we could talk about.
Do you want me to do the vacuuming? Because this is the neatest studio I've ever been in. I trust you to have the neatest studio, Ed.
I've brought you to a good place. Matt Hill, thank you very much.
Good on you. Thanks, mate.